Hi, good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining me again. I'm Dr. Philip McMillan, and I've been following and focusing on the science around COVID 19 since 2020. So, you may find, if you're just listening for the first time, that what I say may challenge a narrative because I'm trying to make sense of the science and critically to try and extrapolate what is likely to happen next, to explain what you are seeing now and why is it that nobody seems to be trying to do this? So, whether or not they agree or disagree with me, they're silent because the reality is they can't explain the science because they haven't been following it. So, just a reminder before I start, coming up in another few days, COVID's hidden time bomb, rapid arterial aging. It may sound nebulous, but what we're talking here is about damage to blood vessels causing dementia, heart disease, kidney disease, hypertension, the works. A recent study had come out, and I'm trying to take apart the science to try and evaluate what it means to the population. Look in the description below, and critically, please remember to like and subscribe. That helps our algorithm, and comment, even if it's just to say thank you. It really does help. So let's get started with just what this is about. Essentially, in the past 24 hours, I did this video, Unvaccinated Dodging COVID. What is the scientific explanation? And this seems to have gotten a lot of attention. And I've been trying to go through some of the questions that were in the comments. I do try and read the comments. And it is challenging to answer some questions in just a simple comment because I don't have the time. And you can see here, and just in case anybody who is watching this doesn't realize what is going on, I have the advantage in hearing from you guys. So I know what the perception is and what people are saying in the general public. And you can see here, you may not be able to read it so easily, but this the top comment, one of the top comments is unvaxxed and fine, losing vaxxed friends to cancer, heart attacks, and stroke. No jab, just anger over what has been they did to the world. 78 years old, no jab and perfectly fine. So all of these comments are coming in from a lot of the cohorts who are unvaccinated. It's important to acknowledge, however, is that there are certain high-risk people who would or could have benefited from the vaccine early in the pandemic if they didn't have mucosal immunity to any coronavirus or even a rhinovirus. The issue is that it's very difficult to know if you would have had protection. That's part of the gamble in a high risk cohort. But the most important point is if they made it through an infection, if you understand the science, they are unlikely to have severe COVID 19 again, unless they have interferon autoantibodies. But that's a smaller cohort, and they tended to have more severe disease early on. So the point that I'm making is that what I was making in that actual video here, which it was talking about unvaccinated dodging COVID, I was highlighting the fact that they are promoting vaccines to the vaccinated cohort and they're not so concerned about the unvaccinated. Is it that they don't care? I suspect they just know that the science indicates that they are largely fine. So I was looking at those reasons to try and explain why that occurred. So let me explain to you why I'm talking about it again. It's a very simple point that I wanted to make because it was asked in the questions and I realized that I didn't have a good answer for it. And so I went and did some research to look at what was happening. I'm just making it a little bit bigger here so that you can see it. So what was happening so that I could then give an explanation, because the question is, what happens to the vaccinated who had stopped getting vaccines or boosters? What happens to them in the context of the immune system? And I really had to put some thought to that because it's a nuanced answer as to what they do. If they're high risk, if they have already been boosted, my instinct is that they're already on the treadmill. Taking them off the treadmill because then they will lose their IgG4, which is protective in the short term. Then they have an increased risk in the short term as well from COVID. And so they are stuck in the sense that they have to just keep on going. And this is why I say that you have to be careful when people talk about not having the option at all. I don't necessarily think that's logical, because based on the science, we know that if they are on the treadmill, if they are already being boosted, if they just stop and they get COVID, it seems that their risk is higher. That's what the Denmark data showed. So the challenge is you may have to be honest with the public. And this is where I think the problem is that there doesn't seem to be want to be honesty. And so therefore you should be saying to them, listen, okay, we realize that once you're on the treadmill, because we have all these circulating variants, we're not sure if you can come off it. And that's probably an honest answer. And I'll explain to you why I think so. This is, again, my explanation. It's just what I'm thinking as I analyze the science and try and explain what I think is happening. So, as a reminder, if you've just joined me, it's really because there were so many comments here that needed to be addressed. It was never the vaccine, glad to have helped. No jab for me. I'm almost 70, unvaxxed. And you can see all of these responses here. And what you have to look at is not just the response, but the amount of likes it gets, because it gives you an indication as to what people are thinking generally. And this is why I said this information is extremely valuable to understand the general public perception. I have an advantage when I talk to other doctors about this, because I'm seeing the real world information from you all. So the simple question I want to answer now: what is the situation for those who have had a vaccine already and they're already boosted? They are on that treadmill. What do they do? So, just some simple science. Again, the premise is that if you have good mucosal immunity, the virus can't easily break through. And so, this amount of virus in the bloodstream, because everything is about reducing spike exposure in the systemic circulation, if you don't have much spike exposure, your risks are significantly lower. The point I was making is that in the context of the vaccinated cohort, even though they have good systemic immune responses, the virus is still able to seep through the mucosal immunity, because an injectable vaccine can't adequately train this mucosal immune response. So people would think, well, it doesn't matter, because if you then get infected after you've been vaccinated, you will then have both mucosal immunity and systemic immunity. And that's the logic. But I suspect there are a few factors here that really need to be taken into consideration. So I'm going to take you through a little bit here that I think is relevant. So if that was the case, the virus would have stopped circulating. So we know something is wrong, because it's still circulating quite heavily in highly vaccinated regions. And this paper probably gives us some idea. Neutralization escape by SARS-CoV-2 Omicron subvariant BA2.86. This was from 2023. I think they did one more in 2024, but I think they've stopped doing this because it was showing up that the vaccine was not so effective at neutralizing the new variants. So they stopped looking. But this paper has in it a very important point. And this is the thing that you keep on hearing about. It's what we call immune imprinting. And I'm going to have to make this larger so that you can see this image. But when you give a booster, and this was when they were giving the bivalent booster, and don't look at the where these are, because it appears that they're close together. What you have to do is look at the numbers. Okay, so when they gave the Omicron booster, this here, the highest response was to the original Wuhan variant. That's WA1 2020, 16,000. Their target was the variants down here. You can see that literally you only got a response in the hundreds versus 16,000 to the original variant. It's what you call immune imprinting. So what it means is that when the person is boosted, the primary antibodies that are being produced are the antibodies to the original variant. That's a problem. And what's most interesting is that even if they got an infection, and again, look at this. So they got an infection, so it's 6 months with XBB, and you can see here there was a boost from 16,000 to 35,000 for the original variant, and it only went from 150, say, to 461 in terms of the neutralizing titer for the XBB variants. This is very suggestive that the immune system is locked in position. And this is the point that I'm making, is that when people say that the vaccines don't work, I think you have to be careful there, because if anything, that is indicating that it probably is working too well. It is causing the immune system to only respond to the spike protein of the original vaccines that were given, and the boosters are unable to shift it out of that locked position. So this is the first thing. The second thing is that when you think about the immune response, and this is now another paper talking about epitope profiling, looking at the binding signatures of SARS-CoV-2. Now, it's important to note that this paper was from 2021, and they were therefore before vaccines, looking at natural infection and cross-reactivity with other coronaviruses. So now this is another very, very important piece of information. So when you look at what happens, and I hope you can make sense of what I'm showing here, before I show you this, just when the virus is picked up by an antigen presenting cell of the immune system, what it does is that it kind of like crushes it into tiny pieces. If you take a large vase, and you smash it, and then you take little pieces, and you will use those pieces as the epitopes to tell the immune system what to focus on. So little pieces of the virus are then used to tell the immune system, this is what you target, okay? Those are what you call epitopes. When you look at the epitopes that the immune system was targeting, what you can see is that the vast majority in green is the ORF1AB, the open reading frame proteins. Spike is number 2, then nuclear capsid. But in terms of the numbers, it's all more than double that are the open reading frame 1AB. This is extremely important, okay? Because what it's telling you is that the natural immune response uses the spike protein as a backup. It's not the main thing. Now, I'm from the simple premise that I don't think anything can be better than what you have been God given, meaning that you can't make a better heart, you can't make a better brain, you can't make a better immune system. And so everything you must be doing must be as best as possible to replicate what the immune system is doing. Anything that is different, and this is just my opinion, I don't think it can be anywhere as effective as what you have already been given naturally. It's my opinion, and truthfully, the pandemic seems to have confirmed that premise. So here is us getting back to the science that's important. So follow along here. When it comes to severe disease, because this is what we were concerned about, it's not whether or not somebody has an infection. It's only part of the problem. Early in the pandemic, all that happened is you needed to prevent severe disease. So if somebody already had natural mucosal immunity, when you understand the science, you will understand why they rarely get severe COVID. Doesn't mean they can't get COVID, doesn't mean they can't get a viral pneumonia even, but they won't get a cytokine storm. And there is a reason. And the reason is linked to interferon. And this study was done from 2016 by Chana Pavara, and he was looking at interferon responses. And what they found is that if you had an early interferon response, interferon is the warning signal that there's a virus around. If it was early, even if you had a viral infection, you didn't have severe disease. If you had no interferon response, if you were old and frail and you had a big spike in virus, you still didn't have severe disease. Remarkably, what caused severe disease was a delayed, strong interferon response. Now, the reason this is important is because if somebody has mucosal immunity, they almost always will get an early interferon response. It doesn't mean that the virus can't infect. It just means that they won't go on to get severe disease. This little piece of information should have been the critical factor why people who already had natural immunity were at such low risk and in reality didn't need to be targeted. That's a different question, but let's concentrate now on the primary aim that I'm going for, which is to talk about what happens to the vaccinated cohort who then stops getting further doses. Do they then revert back to normal? Remember what I showed you with the immune response, primarily the ORF proteins? Now, when you look at the immune system, the mucosal immune system, it's very sophisticated. And these immune cells, even if the virus penetrated the wall, these soldiers would take them out. Now, there's a very important thing that we have to understand with taking out this wall. And it's this to do with virally infected cells. Okay? Now, let me make you an explanation here. I'm trying to simplify the ideas. Antibodies are like shooting missiles or bullets. The great advantage is that they can be produced in a lymph node and at a distance they can target a virus, one virus. But the problem is that if you have multiple cells that are infected producing thousands of viral particles each, it can easily become overwhelmed. So the way how the immune system addresses this is not just targeting the virus with bullets, but they destroy the factories. And this is what it looks like. So instead of just targeting this virus with antibodies, these T cells, these are like the military grade Marines or SAS. These guys just kill the cell. Once they're infected, they just kill it. Boom, cell is dead. No more production of virus. It stops thousands of viral particles. And this is the critical cleanup mechanism that the body uses. The problem is that these are targeting or should be targeting primarily ORF1AB, not the spike. And the spike protein seems to be the primary responder across the board in those who have been vaccinated. And what that means is that it seems as though this will be slower, less effective at addressing the mucosal immune cells. And so therefore, there would be a higher risk in that cohort of getting an infection. This is not easy to work through. And this is why I said I'm explaining my hypothesis here. The question becomes, if the vaccinated then suddenly stop getting a vaccine, will they automatically revert to normal? And my answer is that based on the study that was done, when we look at the neutralization, I'm not sure if that happens. They're still locked to the Wuhan spike. That's systemically and probably mucosally as well. This may improve over time, but it does mean that that cohort may still be vulnerable to a COVID infection. And this is where we get really complex because we need to, and there's, sorry about that. We were targeting the high risk, but the high risk cohort now, because we targeted the low risk, and the low risk cohorts now can't properly neutralize the virus, they are putting the high risk at high risk, more risk. Now you're stuck. And this is what I'm saying, is that there needs to be an open, honest discussion about exactly where we are. And based on everything we're saying here, we have to expect more variants, because the immune system is just not effective enough in large portions of the vaccinated cohorts. That's my assessment. And based on everything that I am seeing, I'm not sure any other scientific explanation can hold water. The question remains is, if we stop now, will it automatically revert to normal? I think it will improve, but it probably may not in the long term revert to normal. Nobody wants to take responsibility for that. Nobody will want to acknowledge that. They would rather this to simply drift away. But the problem is the virus is still circulating. There is no easy get out here, and it just means we have to hope for the best. So just a reminder, coming up in the next few days, rapid arterial aging. You should join this, because this is the kind of information that you will hear about in another 2 years' time. This is important stuff. If you want to stay ahead of the game, certainly keep in touch. Have a great evening.